and you can make a difference.
Christians do bring an element of salt and light to contemporary affairs.
Our Lord said that we were to be in the world and not of the world.
If we as Christians will allow God to melt our hearts, the same fire that is melting us will melt those around us.
Last week I had the opportunity to go on a few days of vacation, and one of the things I enjoy doing is going fishing. And my brother's the big fisherman in the family. I usually go once a year, and he goes once a week. And so we got together, and we're out in the lake and having a great time. I remember one of the stories Paul told me about a fisherman in his home area that seemed to catch more fish than everyone else. In fact, he used to bring his fish in gunny sacks out of the boat. I mean, that's how many fish he had. And the other fishermen on the lake kind of got suspicious about what's going on and really jealous. And so finally they went to the game warden and said, listen, we think you should check this guy out. Something funny's going on. So the game warden went up to this guy. They called him Old John. He was kind of an old geezer that went out in his boat with a little motor on the back. And he said to Old John, he said, listen, I want to go fishing with you and see how you catch all these fish. Old John said, fine, be here in the morning about 9 o'clock. He said, isn't that kind of late? No, we'll catch a passel. And so they got at 9 o'clock, he got into the boat, and they went out into a little cove in the corner of the lake, and Old John reached under the seat of the little boat they were in, pulled out a stick of dynamite, lit it, threw it in the water, and big old explosion, and fish started floating up, and Old John's rowing around, picking up the fish and sticking them in a gunny sack. And the game warden is just there with his mouth wide open. He can't believe that he's doing it. He said, I can't believe you're doing this in front of me. Old John didn't say anything, reached under the seat, got another piece of dynamite, lit it, handed it to the game warden, said, you want to fish, you want to talk. I think there's a lesson for us in what we're doing in this conference. We can do a lot of talking about these issues, but the question this time around is, are we going to fish or are we going to talk? And it's a pleasure to be able this morning to really look at the issue of how we're going to make a difference in health care. After 2 nights on call and a full day in the office, Kathy sorted through the mail quickly to see what needed her attention. She'd been especially busy. Her partner, Bill, was taking a couple days off before Kathy would take her turn attending the State Medical Association meeting. She was looking forward to seeing her old friends, and especially to getting 4 consecutive good nights of sleep. Any of you in healthcare know what that means. As she set down the mail, Kathy grabbed the meeting packet from her desk where it had sat for the last 2 weeks. She glanced at the agenda items. She couldn't believe it. The first proposal on the agenda, submitted by Bill Engstrom, was that the association adopt a neutral stance on physician-assisted suicide. Now, Kathy had gone to medical school with Bill 20 years ago. For the last few years, she had noticed his name in the paper and his face on TV as one of the state's leading proponents of physician-assisted suicide. All the same, she couldn't believe it. He had actually sponsored the motion on the ballot. A neutral position by the association would add enormous impetus to legalizing physician-assisted suicide in the state. What in the world could she do on such short notice? Elsewhere, wow, what a great rotation, John thought to himself. Well, that settles it for me. I know the answer to the big question. I'm going to specialize in OBGYN. During his rotation in obstetrics and gynecology, John had discovered that he loved delivering babies, even in the middle of the night. He bubbled over as he shared his news with Melinda, one of the young women in his Christian Medical and Dental Society campus group. But Melinda's first comment threw ice water on his enthusiasm. She said, I hear it's almost impossible to get into many OBGYN residencies unless you're willing to do abortions. One of my pro-life friends, who ranked in the top 10% of his class, listed a number of residencies and didn't have a single match. She was way out on a limb trying to find a residency when she didn't match. Meanwhile, Janet was so upset that she couldn't sleep after coming off her evening shift as an RN in the ICU. She thought she knew Dr. Little pretty well after taking care of his admissions for the last 10 years. That's why Janet couldn't believe it when Dr. Little ordered 10 milligrams of morphine and the ventilator to be removed from Mrs. Cushy. Mrs. Cushy was a 72-year-old lady. She had suffered a stroke 5 days ago. She was paralyzed on her left side and subsequently aspirated. She now required ventilator support, but her pneumonia was improving. She was semi-comatose, but how much of that was due to her medical problems and how much was due to the sedative she was receiving wasn't really known. Janet had seen some improvement in the last 24 hours. Mrs. Cushy was now responding to some verbal stimuli. She followed Janet with her eyes as Janet moved around the room, and she was moving her right side well. Janet told Dr. Little that Mrs. Cushy would die if she were given the morphine and had the ventilator removed. And he replied curtly that he realized that's what would happen. He confided that Mrs. Cushy's daughter, a busy lawyer, had assured him that her mom would not want to live paralyzed. The daughter had requested that all heroic efforts be stopped. I didn't have any choice, Dr. Little offered. The daughter had a power of attorney for health care. Janet refused to be part of killing a patient who, although partially paralyzed, still had a reasonable chance to live. So Dr. Little had decided to task the night shift nurse with the assignment. And as a result, Mrs. Cushy was probably dying right now. Janet tortured herself with second thoughts. Should I have done more? Should I have taken the issue to the administration, to the hospital medical director? Did I just stand by and allow this woman's life to be taken from her? Was Dr. Little ethically justified or dead wrong? Have I put my job in jeopardy by refusing to carry out his orders? I wish I could say that all of these scenarios are fictional. Unfortunately, they are composites of phone calls and conversations that we at the Christian Medical and Dental Society often have with physicians, nurses, physician assistants, students, and even patient families. These and hundreds of other stories illustrate the point that ethics is no longer an abstract set of issues for healthcare professionals. Increasingly, healthcare professionals face agonizing quandaries on a shifting ethical landscape. It's hard enough to just keep abreast of rapidly developing technology, much less to determine the ethics of its application. Issues once thought settled are now unsettling. Euthanasia, abortion, homosexuality, even pedophilia are often redefined as good and even noble choices. Doctors already feel overwhelmed by managed care's hurricane force of change. Seemingly overnight, medicine underwent a transformation from a profession and a calling to a business. Many doctors have lost their autonomy. They now serve as employees who spend up to 3 hours a day asking permission from algorithm-obsessed functionaries to provide tests, prescriptions, and procedures that they deem essential. Out of mounting frustration, the American Medical Association's House of Delegates recently overturned the AMA Board of Trustees' recommendations and voted to establish a doctors' union. Business interests pressures nurses to do more with less personnel. Their geysers of paperwork make Old Faithful look like a water fountain. In this war zone of business and bureaucracy, patient care and professional satisfaction are the casualties. Christian healthcare professionals are encouraged to practice New Age medicine, such as therapeutic touch. Others are pressured to compromise their moral stands, such as obstetrical nurses who are often expected to participate in abortions if they want to be promoted in their departments. Nurses find themselves increasingly caught in the middle between doctor and patient and family. Other health professionals face similar and unique problems that fill their workplace with mounting stress. In the midst of the tumult, many take a defensive posture. They just try to survive, avoiding conflict whenever possible. Why try to stop the ethical avalanche when you're likely to get buried alive? It's safer to just try to survive until retirement, or if that's too far away, switch into another career. I believe God has put Christians into health care for just such a time as this. Like Daniel and Esther, Christian healthcare professionals can use their position and influence to alter the outcome of the natural course of events. The need has never been greater, nor the issues more vital. Why exactly is it so critical that healthcare professionals show up to fight in these ethical wars? First of all, healthcare professionals have a unique set of powerful weapons to influence the war's outcome. The first weapon is their armor of knowledge. Knowledge of the science and technology is key in almost every controversy, since those on the other side often distort, if not disembowel, the facts. This is usually done through scientific experts with great credentials that are willing to prostitute their credibility to advance their own agenda. Healthcare professionals can answer questions such as, is a mother's health really a justification for a partial birth abortion? Is there a better alternative to killing embryos to obtain stem cells? Is severe pain controllable with modern methods of analgesia, sedatives, and anesthesia? Does the fetus feel pain during a second trimester abortion? When knowledge is ammunition, the answer to these and hundreds of similar questions have a powerful effect on the battle. Healthcare professionals also hold secret knowledge. No one else has the same access to the hushed halls of hospitals, clinics, and nursing homes. No one else stands at the bedside or beside the exam table as patients pour out their hearts about their unplanned pregnancies or receive the news that they have a terminal illness. No one else is agonized about whether to put a patient on a ventilator. No one else has titrated the morphine to decrease the air hunger when the patient is taken off a ventilator to die. Healthcare providers have sympathetically traveled down the same road that their chronically and terminally ill patients have traveled. Every person, all of which one day will be patients, value and desire that secret knowledge of what lies ahead. Secondly, healthcare professionals have the weapon of experience. Nothing speaks louder than experience. They've wrestled with applying ethical principles to clinical situations, and they have the heart-gripping stories to sway not just the intellect, but also the heart of decision makers. Let me give you an example. Physician-assisted suicide advocates state that if a patient is competent, has uncontrollable suffering, and is terminally ill with less than 6 months to live, the patient should have the right to die with the aid of their physician. This statement is full of a number of presuppositions. Let's just pick one of them. This argument presumes that doctors can accurately predict that a patient only has 6 months to live. From my knowledge, I can quote the statistics that half the doctors in Oregon admitted they couldn't accurately predict that a patient has only 6 months to live all the time. From my experience, I can say I believe the other 50% are lying. My experience as a clinician has shown me that patients often live much longer than expected, and that new treatments can also unexpectedly prolong their lives. But to really impact the debate, I can tell a story like this. My mother-in-law had metastatic breast cancer. She suffered a light stroke. She had severe obstructive respiratory disease. The cancer was in her bones. She wasn't eating. Her lips were cyanotic from her lung problem, and her weight was down to 85 pounds. Her primary doctor and her specialist advised us that we should come from Kenya to see her one last Christmas before she died. Now, as a physician, knowing her condition, I agreed that she was unlikely to survive even a few more months. I believed it to the extent that I spent $3,000 of our meager savings for my wife and me to travel to the United States. We had a wonderful Christmas. My mother-in-law ultimately did die, but the doctors, including yours truly, were very wrong. She didn't die in a couple of months, but 15 wonderful years later. Get the point? A good story told from the vantage point of experience carries much more weight in people's mind than do reams of data. Why? Because they put themselves emotionally into the situation described. They see themselves as the husband, the wife, the child, or the critically ill patient. Human interest stories have been one of the keys to the success of the euthanasia and abortion forces. Because of healthcare workers' experiences, they can relate the first-hand stories that let the public travel to the patient's bedside. Data changes knowledge, but stories change hearts. Voting levers, poll questionnaires, and personal decisions are often pulled by the heartstrings. Healthcare professionals have the keys to the nuclear weapon silos in many ethical debates. Thirdly, the relationships of caregivers give them the weapon of influence. Healthcare professionals have a unique relationship with patient and family. They listen to and examine each patient. They order the test and they carry them out. Healthcare professionals plan the therapy and they administer it. They control and interpret the flow of information. The patient and families look to healthcare professionals for expert advice and are profoundly influenced by it. This relationship can yield confidence or anger, hope or despair, laughter or tears, or even a mixture of all these emotions all at the same time. The patient and family's entire day in the hospital is built around the few minutes that they have with each doctor, nurse, or other caregiver. This relationship is built upon and sustained by trust, a mighty weapon in the ethical wars. Caregivers also belong to a unique fraternity of healthcare providers. It is difficult to influence this fraternity as an outsider because of the intense training, unique knowledge, rich experience base, and high stress load caregivers have. This fraternity is very tight. It's built on an unspoken belief that somehow outsiders cannot fully understand their world and thus have little right to influence it. So they look to members of the fraternity as they take their positions on the issues. The extent of the influence depends on the caregiver's ranking in the pecking order of the healthcare fraternity. Healthcare professionals also have a singular influence because of their relationship with third-party payers, such as managed care organizations, insurance companies, and the government. Unfortunately, this influence has markedly decreased in the last decade as payers have capitalized on the fact that money leverages power. They have cornered the market by offering cheaper healthcare costs to businesses and legislators and then dictating their terms to providers. Cowed by the threat of, quote, accept our terms or lose your patient base, end quote, payers have intimidated doctors into working much harder for a lot less. Healthcare inflation has dropped, but only at the expense of dumbing down the healthcare profession and converting it to a business model of efficiency and production quotas. This has resulted in less well-trained caregivers, fewer providers, and scores of healthcare personnel at the peak of their knowledge and efficiency leaving their profession out of frustration and anger. The pendulum may be beginning to swing back in some areas as healthcare providers are speaking out and banding together to protect their interest and the interest of their patients. Their influence with the payers is growing once again, but at times at the expense of their professional integrity. Though less potent, this influence with payers still can be used in ethical battles. The fourth major weapon is that of respect. Healthcare givers enjoy a high level of respect with their patients and with the man on the street. This is especially true if they are perceived as genuinely caring, sacrificial, and competent. This is where Christian caregivers have the edge. They should leverage that edge by referring to their work with the poor in domestics and international missions, in their contacts with their media and their colleagues. They need to share about their holistic approach to patient care, their community service efforts, and show a caring and a compassionate heart for everyone and anyone who is suffering. This is not to forsake humility, but to build the influence and respect that opens the doors to receive the Christian message. Healthcare givers also need to be involved in the ethical war because the outcome of that war will directly impact them. They are the ones who will be asked to apply the new ethics to their patients and their practice. This is already happening as doctors are being asked to turn off ventilators. Georgette Smith was accidentally shot by her mother, who was aiming at her boyfriend. The boyfriend had suggested that the mother be put in a nursing home against her will. As a result of a neck wound, Georgette had become a quadriplegic, dependent on a ventilator. After a psychiatrist declared Georgette competent, she petitioned the court to have the ventilator removed. The court said she had the right to refuse care, which she did, but made no comment on whether or not she was suicidally depressed or lacked adequate support systems. The judge also did not note the fact that almost all new quadriplegic patients first go through a period of depression and suicidal idealization. The judge did note that his order would allow her to, quote, die with dignity, end quote. A doctor, a nurse, and a respiratory therapist carried out the judge's orders. Ethical wars will also dictate healthcare providers' rights of association. A physician-assisted suicide measure proposed but defeated in Michigan in the fall of 1998 would have prohibited hospitals, practices, nursing homes, and even associations like CMDS from denying memberships or privileges to healthcare providers because they participated in physician-assisted suicides. Nursing homes and hospitals would have been required to provide witnesses for patients, signing papers requesting physician-assisted suicide on their premises. It also would have interfered with the doctor's right to associate with his or her own patients. Let me paint the scenario. A doctor diagnoses metastatic breast cancer and estimates that a woman, a patient of his for 20 years, will live only a few months. On the next visit, the woman asks about physician-assisted suicide, which the doctor opposes on moral grounds. Under the penalty of the law proposed in Michigan, the doctor would have been required to, quote, immediately, end quote, transfer the patient and her records to a doctor who would help her kill herself. He is given no room to try to dissuade the patient, treat her for an underlying depression, or even refer her to a psychiatrist for evaluation. Once she makes the request that conflicts with the doctor's ethics, he is no longer allowed to associate with his patient of many years. In fact, the records have to be transferred to the new doctor within 72 hours. More ethical fallout is on its way. Evil practices always spread and worsen corruption. Abortion has led to the horror of partial birth abortion. Physician-assisted suicide, when legalized, corrupts the medical profession. For example, in Oregon, it requires doctors to lie on death certificates by forbidding them to list the cause of death as suicide. Physician-assisted suicide requires insurance companies to invalidate their suicide exception clauses. It puts a shroud of secrecy around a profession that is built on trust engendered by open peer review. Ultimately, the culture of death will corrupt the whole healthcare system and destroy its foundations of trust. This is already beginning to happen in Holland, where patients routinely carry cards saying, "Please don't euthanize me," in case of an emergency admission to the hospital. Some even hire sitters to protect them from being euthanized against their will during their admission to the hospital. Along with new ethical standards will come pressure to conform. Abortion advocates engineered a resolution by the American Medical Student Association calling for a formal requirement for abortion training in all medical school campuses. A few years ago, the American College of Graduate Medical Education tried to require abortion training for all residencies in obstetrics and gynecology. Discrimination occurs in medical schools and residency admissions on the basis of prospective students' moral and religious beliefs. This is done subtly by asking candidates how they would handle a 16-year-old unmarried female who presents with an 8-week pregnancy for them for care. If the candidate fails to offer the option of abortion, they are likely to be eliminated from the admissions list. Nursing students are now regularly exposed to and encouraged to participate in therapeutic touch classes in many schools, and the list goes on and on. The excesses of managed care are causing anger, disillusionment, and depression among healthcare providers. The frustration of being prevented from meeting a patient's needs is causing many to leave their profession, often at their peak of their careers and their expertise. They no longer want to associate themselves with an increasingly mechanistic healthcare system that overwhelms them with paperwork of bureaucracy and conflict. It's clear that the outcome of the ethical wars will have a profound influence on individual healthcare practitioners, their professions, and the entire healthcare system. It is in every healthcare provider's interest to become involved before it's too late to affect the outcome. Yet many do not. What inhibitions must be overcome to get caregivers with all their knowledge, their experience, and their influence involved? A major inhibition many caregivers feel is that they have not invested the time to think through the issues and establish their own positions. Consumed by the demands of daily life and practice, they've adopted the attitude of sufficient unto today are the problems thereof. They haven't peered beyond tomorrow or seen the consequences of the changes and the changing principles that have guided medicine for thousands of years. Others have blindly accepted the world's attitude of what is right for you is right for you, and what is right for me is right for me. Having elevated tolerance to the status of the primary virtue, they are reluctant to establish any position that requires a stance on principle. Those who take traditional positions on bioethics are sometimes unwilling or unable to communicate with or to convince others. This usually stems from their lack of knowledge on the issues. Doctors, nurses, and other caregivers are looked to daily as experts. Their credibility is built on their expertise. If they don't feel like an expert, for example, on abortion, they will avoid opportunities to influence others on the issue. They don't want to be revealed as, quote, experts, end quote, with feet of clay, so they defer to others. Healthcare givers face enormous constraints on their time, which makes it difficult to keep up in their own field, much less to invest significant effort in becoming ethically literate. Increasing paperwork, seeing more patients in less time, and becoming an employee not in charge of their own professional lives makes it difficult for doctors to find time. Nurses' schedules are not much better, and the stress involved in their jobs has dramatically increased. They are expected to get more done with fewer trained personnel. Time constraints are a significant inhibitor to caregivers, making a difference in the ethical wars. Time constraints also impact caregivers' capability to develop good presentations on an ethical topic, If they're going to influence others in the healthcare professions, they need a set of slides or a PC-based presentation or other tools to communicate their message. Preparing these tools requires research and documentation. Tools as well as knowledge are needed to make a difference. Many healthcare givers are inhibited by a real or perceived fear of professional consequences of speaking out on ethical issues. This is especially true on the abortion issue, where the debate lines are drawn in stone. Healthcare professionals are likely to be discriminated against in salary, promotion, and even their job if they dare to take a bold stand. This is especially true for those who are young in their profession. Healthcare providers also are concerned about having the right platforms from which to speak. It is critical that they are positioned correctly before the church, the media, the public, and their colleagues to give them the appropriate forums for communication. It's important that they can be easily identified as a healthcare professional and that they have the opportunity to use their strongest weapons. I was on the steps of the Supreme Court the day that physician-assisted suicide was argued. There was a lot of media attention, and I had the opportunity to speak to a number of reporters. Afterwards, I realized I would have had many, many more opportunities to influence public opinion if I had done just one thing. You know what that was? Wear a white coat. It would have clearly said that I was a doctor and attracted the hordes of media that were present. I would have been the only identifiable doctor at the venue. Identifying myself as a doctor would have given me the important platforms I sought as the executive director of the Christian Medical and Dental Society. Healthcare professionals also are inhibited in using their influence unless they see they fit into an overall strategy. This gives them a clear roadmap of why they need to be involved and how their efforts can provide synergy for the whole of what is being done. They like to feel they have a more reasonable chance of winning the battle, and they gather strength and focus by working with a group. Healthcare professionals, because of the nature of their work, are team players. Even a surgeon can't do a major operation alone. A strategy can only be laid out if there is leadership that gives a compelling call for involvement, clearly communicates the strategy, demonstrates what needs to be done by example, and continues to motivate those involved and trains and equips the troops. As in real wars, battles are won because of leadership and good logistics. So on a practical level, how can a healthcare provider's inhibitions be overcome? How can they be mobilized to make a greater difference in the days ahead? The first task is motivation. The alarm must be sounded. A clear picture of what will happen to healthcare, patient relationships, and those who provide it must be painted. Both informational and emotive methods must be used. This can and is being done through direct mail, audio and visual presentations, major meetings, articles, and other forums. We must motivate not only Christian professionals, but also others who are likely to sign on to our cause. This means we must intentionally target secular professional organizations. For example, last year, the Christian Medical and Dental Society contributed a lecture on physician-assisted suicide to an audio digest tape received by thousands of family practitioners across the country. That came about after I had heard a very pro-assisted suicide lecture on a tape. I took the time to kindly, but firmly, chastise the publisher of the CME resource for not presenting a balanced view. Now, I wrote this letter and I was pretty hot, I admit. And I didn't hear anything for almost 2 months and thought he had deposited my letter in the round file. Then a letter arrived which said this, quote, "I've had your letter on my desk for a couple of months and every day would look at it and try to justify in my mind our actions. I finally have decided that we can't. We were wrong to give such an unbalanced view. Would you know of someone who could present the other side of the debate?" End quote. Realizing that time was of the essence, I walked into our studio at CMDS and gave a good lecture to the 4 walls of the studio and sent it off to the publisher. I didn't hear anything for 6 months and had almost forgotten the incident. So much for wanting to present a balanced view, I thought. Then one morning I popped, as I often do, one of my latest family practice audio digest tapes into my car tape deck as I headed to work. I almost wrecked. The first speaker was me. That lecture emboldened me to explore last fall how this same material could get on the agenda of the American Academy of Family Practice at its 1999 meeting in Orlando, which comes in just a few months. A few phone calls got me to the right person who made the decisions about what the plenary sessions would be. It turned out to be a believer. I sent him the audio digest tape and some other materials. To make a long story short, I'll be giving the critical issue plenary on physician-assisted suicide at the National AFP meeting in September. Has this happened because of my great talent or my connections? No, it just happened because I was motivated to sound the alarm. The second strategy to overcome inhibitions is to educate healthcare givers. That is why this and other ethical conferences are so important to participate in and to promote. That is why the Christian Medical and Dental Society and the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity have co-sponsored breathtaking decision conferences across this country. These educational opportunities must be intensely practical. Most caregivers are not going to have the time to get advanced degrees, but are eager to get education that will enable them to make wise decisions in their practices and to influence others. Educational efforts must emphasize distance learning that is of high quality and is convenient. The Christian Medical and Dental Society has found audio tapes to be an extremely popular format for our busy members. The internet will be the classroom of choice in the days ahead. Informal educational techniques must also be utilized. Chat rooms are becoming more and more popular. List servers work well with busy professionals who don't have time to scan the news wires and locate important stories. The Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity has done a good job providing this type of service. It's important that healthcare providers are not only given information, but also taught how to use it effectively. How to communicate is as important as what to communicate. Healthcare providers must also be well equipped. As I was thinking about this a few years ago, I was reminded of all the opportunities that doctors routinely pass up. For example, the pastor of the local church calls and asks if a doctor can speak to the youth group on abortion or another issue. What does the doctor think first? She says, "Yes, I really should do that." The second thought that crosses the doctor's mind is, where in the world am I going to find the time to get something credible together by Sunday evening so that I can be the expert they think I am? So what does the doctor say? Well, you know, I really would like to speak, but you know, I'm just so busy, I can't do it. That's why Christian Medical and Dental Society started putting together resource kits like our Battle for Life on physician-assisted suicide and our Gift of Life on abortion. Each kit contains all the resources needed to make a healthcare professional into an instant expert. We looked across the spectrum of resources and picked the most effective ones, and then filled in the holes with items that we created. For example, the abortion kit contains books, pamphlets, pictures, a video, speaker's notes, handouts, biblical and secular references, and even a bulletin insert that can be copied and put in the church bulletin. By purchasing items in bulk, we were able to pass on significant savings to our members. These all-in-one resources that educate the purchaser and give them the tools to influence others have been extremely popular. We've sold thousands of them in the last few years. We're now taking it to the next level by producing an interactive CD on genetics and human cloning, which will contain over 100 PowerPoint slides, audio interviews, handouts, and other resources. CMDS conducted a physician-assisted suicide educational campaign in the weeks before the referendum in Michigan in the fall of 1998. I spoke at medical schools and to healthcare provider groups across the state. Those in attendance wanted the information in the well-documented PowerPoint presentation I used. Instead of providing them a handout, which you take home and stick on your desk, we put the whole presentation on our website with a runtime version of PowerPoint. Anyone could go to our site and download a ready-to-use presentation to use or modify it as they saw fit, and even get the program to run it if necessary. This inspired those who wanted to join forces with us in the battle. The ethical battles that are raging require us to develop an overall strategy and to coordinate our efforts. This increases the chances of success, avoids duplication of efforts, and is more cost-effective. In ethical battles to sway the mind of the public, it's important that messages that have been tried and shown to be effective in changing opinions are used. This requires polling and focus groups and the use of professional marketing firms. It also requires a savvy use of the media. These battles are expensive and require significant funding. This is only possible through networking, coordination of efforts, and often joint fundraising. Major donors are attracted to joint efforts and clear strategies. The expense of major campaigns does not preclude the involvement of smaller groups like the Christian Medical and Dental Society, Nurses Christian Fellowship, Christian Pharmacy Fellowship, the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity, and the Christian Legal Society. Each can lend their influence of their membership to the battle. In fact, having a membership is one of the strongest cards that these organizations and others like them bring to the table. Having a mailing list of tens of thousands does not speak as loudly as having a membership of thousands. These smaller groups also have the ability to highly leverage their efforts. They can do it at a low cost. For example, the Christian Medical and Dental Society had considerable impact in the Michigan physician-assisted suicide battle in the fall of 1999 for a total cost of under $10,000. We did this by leveraging the influence of our members. We contacted them to motivate and educate them on the situation and the issues. This included a series of mailings and a speaking tour across the state, focusing on student and graduate groups in meetings open to the public and to the media. We gave attendees specific things they could do and the tools to carry out those assignments. We encouraged doctors to educate their patients and provided them a handout for them to copy and then give to their patients in their examining rooms. Even more effective was our suggestion that they write a letter to each patient in their database, telling them why they oppose the legalization of physician-assisted suicide in Michigan and why they would not participate in providing it even if it were legalized. We gave a sample letter to adapt and send or to copy onto their own stationery. Patients paid attention to letters from their doctors. Most of them think it's a bill. And value the insider perspective their physician brings to the issue. These letters had a great impact and strengthened the bond between patients and their doctors. The doctor was sending each patient more than information. He or she was saying, "I'm concerned about your health and safety. I want to warn you that you could be in jeopardy if physician-assisted suicide is legalized in Michigan." The letter also clearly said that their doctor was pro-life and could be trusted to do what was best for them. The Christian Medical and Dental Society also encouraged doctors to leverage their influence in the public forums in their community. We urged them to start with their own churches, but also to address community organizations such as the Rotary and Lions Clubs, and professional forums such as their county medical society or hospital grand rounds. We also developed a statewide speakers bureau made up of members who we knew could be good speakers. We promoted these speakers to the media for interviews and appearances on radio and TV shows. We felt that one of the reasons the battle on physician-assisted suicide was lost in Oregon was that church members did not vote. In many cases, Christians may have even supported physician-assisted suicide out of a mistaken belief that it was a compassionate act. So in Michigan, we contacted churches across the state with a mailing that alerted them to the issues and let them know speakers were available. Our informational campaign to churches caused a problem. We had more demand for speakers than we could be met by our speakers bureau. To solve this problem with only about 4 weeks to go before the referendum vote, we produced and distributed a video. The video was done in a visit to your family doctor style format. I sat on the edge of my desk wearing a white coat with my stethoscope around my neck. We used a homemade teleprompter containing the key outline of what I wanted to get across. The whole shoot took about 2 hours. With our own equipment, we edited this down to about 25 minutes, added some graphics and some outtakes we already had on file. We offered this video free to any church that would use it in a combined Sunday school class or in a church service the Sunday before the referendum. Over 500 churches obtained the video for use on the Sunday before the vote. We estimated that the video, which cost about $2 in materials and postage, or about $1,000 total for what we did, was seen by at least 100,000 people. That is the kind of cost-effective leverage I like. At a national level, our office provided continued updates throughout the campaign and responded quickly to an ever-changing landscape of obstacles and opportunities. We produced a CD of public service announcements. These PSAs were specifically targeted towards Michigan and used the strategy that had been developed by the coalition of organizations fighting the referendum. These were aired on Christian radio stations across the state free of charge. Cost? About $1 each for materials and another $1 for mailing. We explored the cost of radio and TV advertising on secular radio and TV stations and found it prohibitive. A very focused campaign on just a few stations would cost well over $100,000. So we put our thinking hats on and took another trail that leveraged our assets. We sent 2 of our media staff to Michigan. They interviewed key members involved in end-of-life care and some of their terminally ill patients who were opposed to physician-assisted suicide. We then edited this down to about 2 minutes and put it into a video news release format, just like the news. Stations could use it as it arrived with the voice of our staff member, or using our script, have their own reporter dub in the narration. We sent this video news release to the 47 stations in the state that had local newscasts. Follow-up phone surveys revealed that 84% of these stations used our video news release in their morning, afternoon, and evening news. For a total cost of about $1,500, we obtained the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars of primetime exposure to our message and impacted millions of people. In the video news release, the patient interviews proved particularly effective. One clip from a man suffering from ALS was unforgettable. When asked about whether physician-assisted suicide should be legalized, he responded with an emphatic no, saying it would put the terminally ill in jeopardy. And then he went on to say, quote, "Don't you realize I can go anywhere in the world in my mind?" Our national office continued to put out news releases and provide dozens of TV, radio, and print interviews representing our membership. We found that as a small organization, we could quickly change directions, marshal our staff, and respond immediately. To win wars, good leadership is the key. Leaders must lead from the front by an example. They must be willing to expose themselves to the greatest danger and to clearly shout the battle cry. People follow people. They are looking for leaders to articulate their heartfelt concerns, to teach them, and to lead them into battle. Each of us has our own sphere of influence. Each of the tools that the Christian Medical and Dental Society has used to engage in this battle may not be available to you, but the strategies and the principles hold true. If you are a Christian healthcare professional, your leadership is needed now more than ever before. If you don't step forward, who will? God used people like Moses, who didn't think he spoke well enough. God uses people like Gideon, who felt that he was the least in his family. God even used headstrong, uneducated fishermen like Peter. He doesn't call the already equipped. He equips the called for the task ahead. You in this audience make up much of the leadership in Christian bioethics. We must band together to motivate, to train, and equip healthcare providers. With their intellect, with their influence, they can make a vital difference in the ethical wars that lie ahead. Let's lead them into battle. Thank you.
How committed are you to being a moral leader in today's chaotic world? Do you have the courage to stand on your convictions? Are you willing to speak up for God and for what is morally right, even if it results in extreme sacrifice? Cassie did. In the time of crisis, being unfaithful to her Lord was unthinkable. On April 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School, just 10 minutes from my home, one of the teenage gunmen pointed his gun at Cassie and asked, "Do you believe in God?" According to witnesses, she paused and then responded, "Yes, I believe in God." "Why?" he asked. And before she could respond, he shot her dead. My daughter, Elizabeth, knew Cassie Bernal, the 17-year-old Columbine student who became a martyr for Jesus. Cassie was a soccer player, just like our Elizabeth. She played goalie, and Elizabeth and Cassie went to soccer practices and goalie camps together. The Columbine tragedy has touched our lives, as I know it has touched yours. And Cassie's courageous commitment to her faith has much to say to us here today about making a difference in our culture. As Dr. Stevens has so wisely and accurately stated, Christian healthcare professionals do have a unique platform from which to speak and act as we face the moral dilemmas today. I, too, believe God has placed us in healthcare for just such a time as this, to be a moral conscience, to speak the truth, and to make life-affirming impacts on our culture. I believe today we're being called to moral leadership. The upheaval in healthcare has created unprecedented ethical dilemmas and moral ambiguity. Healthcare reform has resulted in fundamental changes in the system. In response to the need to control cost, managed care is now the predominant delivery model. Business of healthcare has created competition for profit corporate entities, and in the midst of these changes, the moral obligations of healthcare professionals and organizations are in flux. At the same time, we're concerned about allocation of limited resources and cost constraints. Advanced technology scientists continue to unravel the complex strands of DNA. Gene assist therapy is being used for diseases, and cloning is no longer science fiction, but reality. In the midst of these changes, the moral rights and duties of individuals and healthcare providers are in disarray. We're in a moral crisis today, a crisis that I believe has more to do with values and belief than with economics. See, medicine and nursing are definitely scientific, practice-based disciplines, but they're also moral endeavors concerned with human decency. Our moral work involves intimate relationships with vulnerable human beings. Yet conflicting values and shifting parameters make it increasingly difficult to find a common moral purpose. The result is that healthcare providers lack the surety of an accurate compass to guide them through these challenging and difficult times. But as Christians, we have a moral compass. Scripture provides the principles, and prayer and the Holy Spirit provide the guidance. The issue is really one of willingness. Are we willing to act on our convictions? In my role as a faculty member, I have the privilege of teaching students about nursing. The joys of teaching are many, but my greatest reward is to encourage students to give voice to their beliefs and then to see them live out those convictions. One student in particular graduated last May. She's already influencing nursing as a moral leader. Jennifer's 23. She's intelligent and competent, compassionate, highly motivated. During school, she became involved in NCF, and she began to grow in her relationship with the Lord. In her words, even though she'd gone to church all her life, her faith became a heart matter, not just head knowledge. Since graduation, I've had the opportunity to mentor Jennifer, to disciple her, encourage her, pray with her about the critical issues in nursing. She works on a very busy oncology unit at a very large acute care hospital. Very shortly after graduation, she had a very heavy patient assignment. She administered that day over 20 medications, IV drugs, including blood, and she was involved in a severe medication error. As she sat before the risk manager and the quality review board of the hospital, in fear of her job, we prayed specifically that God would give her the courage to speak the truth about the real issues. As systems, procedures, and protocols were discussed and reviewed, Jennifer stood firm. Yes, some system changes would be beneficial, but the real issues of patient care assignment, the number, and the RN workload and staffing needed to be addressed. Jennifer didn't lose her job that day. There were other battles for her to fight. According to her, some nurses on her floor prefer to place their cancer patients on continuous drips to save time instead of medicating the patient frequently in small amounts to prevent oversedation. Jennifer very clearly disagrees with this practice and tells this story. Last week, I had a dying man under my care that begged me not to give him anything that would make him sleep. He was terrified of not waking up. His physician ordered a medication that would calm him, control his pain, and would potentially lead to his death. I refused to give it, told the physician that if it were given, he might die in 5 minutes. The physician replied, if it's not given, he'll die of exhaustion. I told her I wouldn't give it, even if it meant he was exhausted. He wanted to be with his family, and God would take him when he was ready. And then I prayed. Amazingly enough, God and I were able to keep his pain under control. The patient lived for a few more days and even went home under hospice care. As a young graduate in nursing, Jennifer's living out her convictions. Jennifer's heeding her call to moral leadership in the healthcare arena. Over the past year, I've also had the privilege of interviewing many nurse executives in top positions in large corporate hospitals. We've talked about the meaning of moral leadership, the dilemmas these nurses face, and the values that prevail as they resolve those dilemmas. Before beginning the research, I truly believed that the ethic of care was being eroded by the overall concern of cost. The ethic of patient advocacy was being replaced by the ethic of stewardship of resources. I've not found this to be true. Instead, preliminary data analysis has revealed a strong quality patient care value base. These nurse executives have learned to balance advocacy and stewardship, to blend cost and caring. These are leaders with clear vision and strong values. They're women of influence who are willing to stand on their conviction for patients and nursing staff. They are heeding their call to moral leadership. It's interesting to note that although I did not ask the question, all of the nurses that I interviewed mentioned strong religious backgrounds and beliefs that provide the framework for their decision-making. In our culture today, there's much opposition to the Christian worldview. But I believe God's word tells us that moral leaders are developed and tested by opposition. Moral leaders must be more committed to courage than they are to comfort and complacency. As I think about the moral leadership that is so desperately needed in healthcare today, I'm reminded of a time long ago when moral chaos reigned. The book of Esther tells of the time during Esther's life when there was a moral crisis that forced her to make a decision involving total commitment. As you remember, Esther was an orphan who, after the death of her parents, was raised by her older cousin Mordecai. She grew into a woman of extraordinary grace and beauty, and she won the favor of everyone who knew her. One day, the Persian king Xerxes selected Esther as his queen. Soon after, Haman, a sinister official in the court, developed a plot to execute all the Jews in the Persian Empire. In short, the Messianic line was in danger of extinction. Mordecai begged Esther to go to the king, persuade him to call off the terrible plan. Esther's initial response to Mordecai's plea was typical of those of us not wanting to get involved. Esther responded by saying she had to follow protocol. She could not go to the king without being summoned. If she did, there was a good chance she could lose her life. Esther held the fate of a nation in her hands, but to act could cost her everything. She was the queen of the most powerful empire on earth and enjoyed all of the privilege that such a position afforded her. Why should she risk her life to persuade the king to change a decree? Why should anyone risk personal gain or position to help others? Because moral leadership demands that we act on God's principles. We must serve others and use our resources to rescue and develop and edify those under our charge. If we don't act, who will? Mordecai had no sympathy for Esther's refusal to help. He responded with 3 profound challenges that strike at the heart of her reluctance. The first challenge repositioned Esther right in the middle of the conflict. Esther was a Jew too. The decree impacted her just as it impacted the rest of the Jewish nation. Mordecai stated, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all Jews will escape. Don't let the comfort and security of your position hinder you from being involved. You cannot escape the situation. Your position places you within the conflict." The second challenge reminded Esther of her call. Esther had the privilege to perform, to speak, and to act on moral conviction. If she didn't act courageously and use her privilege wisely, she would be pushed aside and her role would be given to someone else. Mordecai said, "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place." God is at work in our world. It's a privilege to respond to his call. And the third challenge required Esther to act on her conviction. Mordecai's counsel defines the very essence of moral leadership and should be written boldly on every leader's heart and mind. We've already heard it in every session this weekend. Who knows but that you have come to your position for such a time as this? Each of us has unique gifts and influence to be used for God's plan. In essence, Mordecai reminded Esther that God was sovereign and in charge. Esther was his servant, and her position of power and leadership was by his choice and for his purpose. I love Esther's response. It had a strategy that involved others, and it was a heart response of total commitment. Esther called on her fellow believers to pray and fast, and then she cast herself, her very life, on God in dependence on him. How did God work in this situation? Scripture tells us that the king's heart went out to Esther. He extended his golden scepter. Esther's life was spared, and the Jewish people were rescued. Esther heeded her call to moral leadership. Esther and all others who lead must view their gifts, their resources, even their very life, as God's tools for accomplishing his plan. Our moral call to leadership is not without risk. Esther knew she had to take a life-threatening risk to appeal to the king on behalf of her people. Jennifer knew she was risking her job to speak on behalf of her patients. Some risk position, others risk power or prestige. What are you willing to risk? Cassie Bernal risked it all. She lost her life to gain eternal reward. You know, Cassie's martyrdom is really remarkable when you consider that it was just 2 years ago that she gave her heart to Jesus. Before that, she dabbled in the occult and witchcraft and embraced the very same darkness that drove her killers to this despicable act. But God changed her heart. And when Cassie became a Christian, she dedicated her life to Christ wholeheartedly and completely. She turned her life around and embraced a courageous faith. On the Sunday evening before her death, Cassie shared her testimony with her church family. In closing, I want to share it briefly with you. As we face the challenges in healthcare, and as we work to plan effective strategies, I want us to remember Cassie. Remember her conflict, remember her call, and remember her commitment to her convictions.
He called out. It was maybe 10, 15 minutes into it, said, somebody religious better be praying right now, somebody religious. I remember somebody said that, and they pointed to me and a couple of the kids who they knew were involved with Christ. And I said, hey, we haven't stopped praying since the second one, God was just giving me peace. And I was telling everyone, that I just kept saying to myself, they can take my life, but they can't take God away. And that's what I just had to keep telling myself. And that's what got me through,
While we were running up those stairs, I believe that there were angels all around us. Because those 3 kids right behind, they were directly behind me. And that's when I committed myself to Christ. It wasn't because I was afraid to die or get shot. It's because it was time.
Hey Dave, it's Julie Wysocki. It's 5:15. I was just calling to see if you'd located Cassie. Let me know, okay? 932-8715. Thanks. Bye.
All I've got, all I am, all my dreams, and all my plans, I'm holding back, holding nothing back from you.
I think that the way I'm advancing the kingdom is just being a loyal friend and a good example to non-believers and also Christians. Just trying to not contradict myself and get rid of all hypocrisy and just to live for Christ.
All I've got, all I am, all my dreams, and all my plans, I'm holding back, I'm holding nothing back from you. I trust you completely. I'm here in your hands. If you need to break me,
her eyes, like, they shone with Christ's light. She was so radiant. I just wanted to be around her all the time. She was the most beautiful person I had ever met, and she just shone with Christ's beauty.
Cassie was one of the strongest Christians I've ever known, and the fact that she did that was completely not surprising at all. I knew that she was so willing to die for Christ because that was her love in her life.
She really was learning to surrender it all, It wasn't that Cassie didn't have so many issues that she was dealing with recently, but she truly recently was talking just about how she was learning to surrender stuff. She had dreams of college abroad, but she was saying, I have to yield to God.
Cassie raised the bar up for me in my Christianity. I realized that Cassie showed me I need to live like her, live like Christ. And So really, Cassie raised the bar for me in my Christianity.
Nothing bad from you.
As a result of Cassie's death, my daughter, her friends, the teenagers in Denver are heeding a call to moral leadership. We're in a moral crisis in healthcare today. We have a call from God to stand and act on moral conviction. My prayer for all of us is that we, like Cassie, will heed the call. Together, holding nothing back, we can make a difference. Thank you.